The president of South Africa is a failure. This bold statement didn't come from a foreign politician, but from Julius Malema himself, leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters EFF, during a fiery speech in Kakadi Free State. In that address, Malema not only fired back at former U.S. President Donald Trump's remarks, but openly criticized South African President Cyril Ramaphosa for his silence and submission during their meeting at the White House. The incident quickly spread across social media and international news platforms, sparking intense debates about national dignity, political truth, and leadership accountability. During the White House meeting, Trump raised issues relating to South Africa, from mass graves to the alleged white genocide, without any rebuttal from Ramaphosa. According to Malema, this was a total surrender. He also fiercely rejected Trump's inquiry about why he hadn't been arrested, yet referencing the controversial song, "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer," that Malema once performed. In response, Malema asserted that the song is part of the historical liberation legacy legally protected by South Africa's constitutional court, and he would never stop singing what Winnie Mandela once sang during the anti-apartheid struggle. So what is the real story behind the accusations, the fiery rhetoric, and the deafening silence? In today's video, we will dive deep into the speeches, reactions, and political tensions between Julius Malema, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Donald Trump, three names currently igniting South Africa's political stage. Let's explore why Malema's clapback is making millions rethink the role of leadership and the true meaning of free speech in a constitutional democracy. From the very beginning of his speech, Julius Malema expressed his outrage and defiance. "I will never be intimidated by America. I will never be intimidated by Donald Trump," he declared. With these words, Malema emphasized that he is not someone who can be subdued by power or international status. In his view, being mentioned during the White House meeting without being invited to speak was an act of disrespect and gossip. He firmly argued that if Trump truly wanted the facts, the proper way would have been to invite him for a direct dialogue. "I will confront Trump anywhere, anytime with the facts," Malema said. This demonstrated his self-image as a political figure, unafraid of confrontation and unwilling to compromise on principle. Malema didn't just defend himself, he also defended the historical and legal significance of the song that has sparked international controversy. When Trump questioned, "Why hasn't this man been arrested?" referencing Malema's singing of "Kill the Boer," Malema responded powerfully. He insisted that the question was not just a personal attack, but an assault on the heritage of South Africa's liberation struggle. To him, the song is not incitement to violence, but a symbol of history, one that has been validated by South Africa's constitutional court. "We are a constitutional democracy," Malema stressed. Failing to defend the constitutional court is failing to protect the Constitution. And if you fail to protect the Constitution as president of the country, you have failed in your most basic duty. His speech turned more emotional when he stated, "I am already dead because black people are dead. We have no dignity. We have no human rights. We are waiting for the white supremacists to tell us what direction to take." Here, Malema made a broader call for resistance, not only against Trump's comments, but against a power structure that he believes continues to oppress black South Africans post-apartheid. He did not shy away from revisiting the dangers he faced after singing "Kill the Boer." He reiterated, "This is not my song. I didn't compose it. The heroes of the struggle composed it. And if I stop singing what Winnie Mandela sang, that would be a betrayal of our people's struggle." His rhetoric was not just political. It evoked deep emotional resonance, mixing national pride with historical pain. For his supporters, Malema's words cemented his image as a fearless and principled leader. For his critics, however, his speech may be seen as provocative and divisive, stirring racial tensions. Nevertheless, Malema strategically turned criticism into opportunity, an opportunity to elevate his public image, assert his political stance, and reignite national debates around justice, legacy, and the true role of a president. While the first part of Julius Malema's speech was a direct challenge to Donald Trump, the next segment turned into a full-scale political indictment against South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. In Malema's view, Ramaphosa is not only weak in his leadership, but he also betrayed national dignity by failing to counter the false narratives spread at the White House. Malema accused Ramaphosa of being afraid of Donald Trump. He described the president as someone who left South Africa with courage, but arrived in America trembling. With a tone of mockery, Malema highlighted how Trump asked, "When you say farmers, do you mean white people?" And Ramaphosa offered no rebuttal. According to Malema, this was a perfect moment for Ramaphosa to assert, "Farmers are not just white people. There are also black farmers. I am a farmer myself." Malema continued pointing out how Ramaphosa let Trump present false imagery about South Africa, including photographs of mass graves that were in fact from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Yet Ramaphosa remained silent. Why didn't he say that those images are not from South Africa? "We do not have mass graves of white people in South Africa," Malema said with outrage. For Malema, that silence was not just a personal failure, it was a betrayal of national responsibility. As president, your primary duty is to protect the Constitution and defend the dignity of your country. He failed at both, Malema declared. He didn't stop with Ramaphosa. Malema extended his criticism to the entire South African delegation present at the White House meeting. According to him, the most shameful part was only the white members of the delegation were allowed to speak. The black politicians, who should have stood up and spoken, said nothing. He specifically named and criticized the Minister of International Relations and the Minister of Agriculture for remaining silent in the face of misinformation. Why are they still getting paid? If they did nothing, then let's give their salaries to those white people who actually spoke, Malema said, cuttingly. What stood out in this part of his speech was the mixture of political logic and deep personal emotion. Malema expressed his disappointment not just in Ramaphosa as an individual, but in what he sees as a power structure that continues to prioritize white voices over black voices, even within the ruling government. Toward the end of this segment, Malema summed up his stance with a firm statement. A president cannot allow someone to insult their country on the global stage and sit there smiling. He has failed, not just as a leader, but as a South African. One of the most controversial moments in Julius Malema's speech was when he addressed the song, "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer." This song, closely associated with South Africa's anti-apartheid liberation movement, has long been a subject of fierce debate. While some argue that it incites racial violence, Malema sees it as a symbolic anthem, a reflection of historical memory and national pride. Malema made it clear that he did not compose the song. It was sung by prominent struggle leaders such as Peter Mokaba, Chris Hani, and Winnie Mandela during rallies and protests against apartheid. "I am only defending the legacy of our struggle. This is a song of our heroes," Malema said. To him, refusing to sing the song would be a betrayal of those who sacrificed for South Africa's freedom. When Donald Trump questioned why Malema hadn't been arrested for singing the song, Malema responded furiously. He claimed that Trump was attempting to attack the symbols of black resistance, and that Ramaphosa's failure to defend the Constitutional Court's ruling on the matter represented a total failure of leadership. The song was declared lawful by the Constitutional Court. We live in a constitutional democracy. If the president won't defend the court's decision, then he is betraying the Constitution. Malema emphasized that this was not merely a matter of music. It was about the right to remember and honor a painful yet empowering history. Why are white people allowed to keep their symbols while black people are asked to abandon their memories of struggle, he asked. According to Malema, the call to silence this song is essentially a call for black South Africans to erase their identity and history. In his speech, Malema stated boldly, "I will never stop singing the song that Winnie Mandela sang. It's not incitement, it's inheritance." The crowd responded with thunderous applause, treating the statement like a political oath. Still, Malema didn't shy away from acknowledging the controversy. He admitted that the song might be uncomfortable for some, but he argued, if you want black people to give up this song, then you must also give up injustice, land theft, and the privileges that white people still enjoy. With this line of reasoning, Malema set up a kind of moral exchange. If society wants to remove divisive symbols, it must also dismantle the systemic inequalities that persist today. The segment ended with high emotion. Malema declared that no matter how much criticism he receives, he would continue to sing. It's not an act of hatred. It is a voice of survival. The voice of a people who were once silenced, but who still sing in the darkness. In addition to his comments on political statements, songs, and national dignity, Julius Malema addressed a sensitive but often overlooked topic: the influence of international capitalists and race in political decisions. Among the unexpected names mentioned in his speech was Elon Musk. Malema questioned why Elon Musk, a tech billionaire originally from South Africa, was present at the White House meeting between the South African and U.S. delegations. Although Musk held no official position, he attended the meeting, and according to Malema, this demonstrated the growing influence of white capitalists on South Africa's foreign and economic policy. Malema asserted that Musk's presence was not coincidental. He argued that the true motive was to pave the way for Starlink, Musk's satellite internet company, to be licensed in South Africa. To achieve that, Malema claimed the government was already relaxing Black Economic Empowerment (BEE) requirements, which mandate that at least 30% of a foreign company's ownership be held by Black South Africans. Why this special treatment? Why are some companies being allowed to bypass the rules? Malema asked. He emphasized that South African law does not permit exemptions from BEE requirements, and if Starlink wants to operate in the country, it must comply like every other business. But the issue didn't end with Elon Musk. Malema went on to criticize the fact that during the White House meeting, most of the people who spoke on behalf of South Africa were white, including businessmen and even golf players. Meanwhile, black political leaders such as the Minister of International Relations and the Minister of Trade remained completely silent. What gave them the right to represent our country? Was it the color of their skin? Is it only white skin that gives you a voice? Malema asked sharply. He described this as a clear indication that power structures in South Africa are still racially skewed despite the country's formal end to apartheid decades ago. Malema concluded this part of his address with a powerful call to action. We cannot continue living in a country where black people sit quietly while white people speak for us. That is not freedom. That is apartheid, rebranded under a new disguise. Following the explosive speech, Julius Malema did not return to silence. Across social media, the image of him raising his fist amid a roaring crowd became a symbol that spread across Africa. In the days that followed, rallies supporting him erupted in Cape Town, Durban, and Soweto. People didn't just echo his words, they carried flags, banners, and messages demanding a return of dignity and voice to black South Africans. In Parliament, a group of young MPs from the EFF formally submitted a request for an emergency session to question President Ramaphosa's conduct during the U.S. visit. At the same time, several black farmers' associations publicly backed Malema's stance, stating that they had long been excluded from land reform and financial assistance programs. Meanwhile, the government responded with a vague statement from the president's office, emphasizing respect for diplomatic processes and a desire to avoid unnecessary confrontation. But the statement did little to calm the rising tide of criticism. Internationally, the speech sent ripples through political circles. African leaders across the continent privately acknowledged the growing discontent with passive diplomacy and the resurgence of populist, unapologetic voices like Malema's. Some praised him for saying what many had long felt but dared not speak. Back in South Africa, university students, workers, and community organizers began planning what they called a National Week of Reckoning. Their goal was simple: to reclaim South Africa's dignity challenge, the old hierarchies, and demand that no leader, no matter how powerful, be allowed to remain silent in the face of lies and humiliation. What started as a speech had become a spark, and Julius Malema once again had set the fire. As the National Week of Reckoning approached, tension rippled through South Africa's political landscape. Universities announced walkouts, workers' unions issued public statements of solidarity. Even civil servants quietly began expressing frustration with the government's failure to address what many now saw as a moral crisis. In Soweto, a symbolic march was planned, retracing the footsteps of anti-apartheid protests. This time, however, the chants were different. Silence is betrayal. Dignity is non-negotiable. The spirit of the old struggle had returned, but with new urgency. Malema, aware of the momentum, announced he would lead the march himself. On the morning of the event, tens of thousands flooded the streets wearing red, black, and green. Elderly veterans of the liberation struggle walked alongside teenagers born decades after apartheid. The atmosphere was electric. At the final gathering point, Constitution Hill, Malema climbed onto the makeshift stage. Behind him, a massive banner read, "Not just, free, proud." His speech was short but thunderous. They said our voices don't matter. They said our history is dangerous, but we are the children of Mandela, of Biko, of Winnie, and we will not be erased. Cheers erupted. People wept, embraced, and raised their fists to the sky. That night, international media shifted its tone. Headlines no longer read, "Controversial EFF leader, Sparks division," they now said, "A nation demands its voice." Inside the union buildings, Ramaphosa held a closed-door meeting with his advisors. For the first time in months, he said only one sentence: "We can't ignore him anymore." The morning after the march, newspapers across the world carried front-page photos of Julius Malema standing tall at Constitution Hill, surrounded by a sea of red berets and raised fists. International outlets, once dismissive of his rhetoric, began to question whether South Africa was on the verge of a generational political shift. Analysts spoke of a Malema moment, a sudden awakening of suppressed anger, pride, and unfinished business in post-apartheid South Africa. Meanwhile, inside ANC headquarters in Luthuli House, panic brewed. Senior party members debated behind closed doors. Some argued for damage control, to issue a clarifying statement from Ramaphosa, perhaps even offer a joint press conference to calm the waters. Others warned that any appearance of weakness would only embolden Malema further. The party was split, not just on strategy, but on the deeper question: had the ANC lost its moral authority? Outside, ordinary citizens had already made up their minds. Taxi drivers played Malema's speech on repeat through their radios. School teachers held impromptu lessons on the history of the Kill the Boer song, not as an incitement to hate, but as a cultural artifact of resistance. Churches and mosques debated whether silence in politics was still a virtue. In Johannesburg, a viral video emerged of a young black girl, no older than 10, standing on her school's assembly stage, reciting Malema's words from the Constitution Hill speech with unwavering confidence. "We are the children of Mandela, of Biko, of Winnie." Her voice trembled only once when she looked into the camera and added, "And we're still waiting for justice." The video triggered waves of emotion. Celebrities, artists, and athletes began to speak out. A South African rugby captain posted a photo of the girl with the caption, "We failed her. Let's do better." Malema, ever strategic, didn't immediately respond. He remained quiet for 2 days, long enough for anticipation to build, but short enough to stay in control of the narrative. Then he announced a public town hall meeting in Soweto, inviting citizens, journalists, and even government officials to attend. His message was simple: "This is not about party lines. This is about the soul of our country." As preparations began, it became clear this was no longer just about one song, one meeting, or one president. It was about truth, about who gets to speak and who gets silenced, about whether South Africa's democracy could survive without confronting the ghosts of its past and the compromises of its present. At the center of it all stood Malema, not flawless, not without controversy, but undeniably fearless. And in a country yearning for clarity, his voice was no longer one of protest alone. It was becoming something else entirely, a reckoning, a rallying cry, a reminder. The day of the Soweto town hall arrived with a kind of electricity that South Africa hadn't felt in years. Streets were packed with people from every province, miners from Limpopo University, students from the Western Cape, unemployed youth from Gauteng, and even former ANC veterans who had once marched alongside Nelson Mandela. Some came out of curiosity, others out of frustration, but many came with hope. Hope that someone finally was willing to say what they had felt for too long, that the promise of 1994 had not yet been fulfilled. The town hall wasn't held in a fancy auditorium or government building. It was set up on an open soccer field under a large canvas tent surrounded by food vendors, makeshift banners, and the sounds of drums in the distance. Volunteers handed out printed copies of the South African Constitution, and Malema's team projected live subtitles in multiple indigenous languages across giant screens. When Malema stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell into a near silence. Dressed in a plain black shirt with the words, "We the People," printed across the chest, he began, not with fire, but with calm. "I'm not here to overthrow a government," he said. "I'm here to remind it of the oath it took." He spoke of the Constitution not as a legal document, but as a broken promise. He read aloud clauses about equality, land justice, and dignity, and after each one he asked the crowd, "Have we lived up to this?" A chorus of no echoed in response. He then shifted to the heart of his message, reclaiming dignity for the black majority. He challenged not only Ramaphosa, but all political leaders who, in his words, climbed the ladder of liberation only to pull it up behind them. He criticized policies that served the elite, the weakening of BEE regulations, and the continued economic exclusion of black South Africans. But he also made a bold appeal for unity. This is not a war between black and white. This is a battle between truth and silence, between justice and delay. He called on white South Africans to reflect, not retreat. "We're not asking you to give up your homes. We're asking you to share in the rebuilding of this country fairly and honestly." When the speech ended, the field erupted not in chaos, but in collective clarity. People stayed for hours, discussing, debating, dreaming. It was no longer about Julius Malema as a man, but about the questions he had forced the nation to confront. That evening, while the nation replayed his words, an unexpected statement appeared from the presidency. A national address would be held the following week. Ramaphosa, it seemed, could no longer remain silent. South Africa was now on the brink not of collapse, but of confrontation with its own reflection. And no one knew what the next chapter would bring. 1 week later, the nation held its breath as President Cyril Ramaphosa appeared on live television. The air was heavy with expectation. For the first time in years, millions tuned in, not out of obligation but necessity. The president, solemn and subdued, stood behind the national flag. His voice, though measured, carried the weight of a country on edge. He acknowledged the pain. He admitted the silence. And for the first time, he directly responded to the controversy surrounding the White House visit. "I should have spoken up," he said, "and for that I take responsibility." He called for a national dialogue, not a symbolic one, but a structured citizen-led process to address economic inequality, land reform, and racial reconciliation. He invited Julius Malema and leaders across the political spectrum to participate, saying, "No voice will be excluded. Not anymore." The announcement shocked even his critics. For Malema, it was a symbolic victory, but not a conclusion. He responded with cautious optimism, stating, "The fight is not over. But for once, power has listened." Across the country, something subtle but undeniable shifted. Conversations once whispered in private were now held openly. Citizens long disillusioned began to organize at local levels. Townships, farms, and schools became arenas of civic engagement. And though the future remained uncertain, One truth had emerged. South Africa had crossed a line. The silence was broken, the wounds were visible, but so too was the will to heal. In that fragile space between confrontation and reconciliation, a new chapter was beginning, one not built on fear or forgetting, but on truth, courage, and the collective determination to finally become the nation it had promised to be.